and then sharing the screen. I will also ask that you mute yourself throughout the session. And then once I'm done with the overview, we can open up for Q&A. Okay. All right, so for the agenda, I'm going to do an overview of the fund. I'll share a little bit more about the committee and the process. We'll talk about the timeline, eligibility, and then the funding structure, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Okay. So the fund was established in 2020 as a field of interest fund. For those of you who know ECCF, we have lots of different types of funds that do different things. And this is a field of interest fund. So it's designated to only support the communities of Andover, Lawrence, and North Andover. The primary source of the fund is NiSource, the corporation. And there's 5 key areas of focus of the fund. Safety, STEM and energy education, basic needs and hardship assistance, economic and workforce development, and environmental stewardship. And you can see in each of those categories that there are a fair amount of subcategories. I won't read through them all specifically, but you can feel free to review this on our website or here on the deck. This deck will be shared live in addition to the recording on our website. Go ahead and next slide. The committee is comprised of, so the assets are held at ECCF, but the committee is comprised of 6 different community members who are on the ground, either practitioners or leaders in the community from a diverse representation of backgrounds and professional and personal backgrounds. Then there are two or three different NiSource representatives and 1 Eversource representative. For those of you who weren't aware, Eversource recently purchased Columbia Gas, and NiSource is the owner company formerly of Columbia Gas. Eversource purchased Columbia Gas. And so that's why Eversource and NiSource are on this fund. As I said, the community members are deeply rooted in community, have strong awareness of what's happening in the community. And then I am the liaison from ECCF. I've been a grant maker in the region for over 10 years. And I was selected by NiSource to be the liaison because I led the philanthropic recovery efforts for the residential side as part of the Columbia Gas crisis recovery efforts. So you can go ahead and advance. So from a timeline, we were actually due to launch the fund on March, I think it was 10th, but as you know, the pandemic was unfolding in March. And so we quickly decided to postpone the launch of the fund. We launched on September 10th, announcing guidelines and sharing with the press and putting press releases out. Now in November, we're hosting these 2 live sessions for information gathering by nonprofits or Q&A. And then the deadline is December 4th at 5 p.m. Through the course of December, myself and my team will be doing the initial review of all of the proposals and ranking based on an agreed upon rubric of the committee. Then we'll work in January with the committee to share the initial rubric and scoring of those, all of the proposals. We will share all of those. We'll have ongoing discussions to narrow the pool of applicants and the slate of applicants. And then we'll be inviting the next wave, that kind of narrowing of applicants, to do Zoom presentations between end of January, early February. We'll be making those invitations. That'll be the window of time that those presentations will happen. And then the committee will come together again. So think of those as sort of our replacement for site visits. The committee will reconvene mid-February and then end of February to come back to the rubric and review scoring, and based on the analysis of the presentations, make final determinations at the end of February. And then we at ECCF will be making the notification to grantees by March 1st, and press announcements will go out by March 8th. Go ahead and advance. For eligibility, 501c3 nonprofit organizations who are focused on the communities of Andover, North Andover, and Lawrence are certainly welcome to apply. Municipal applicants are also welcome to apply. However, they must partner with a nonprofit to be qualified to apply. So for example, if the town of North Andover wanted to apply for a specific initiative, they would have to partner with a nonprofit as part of a collaborative proposal to apply. While we're not, we're putting preference on organizations based in the 3 communities. That doesn't mean if your headquarters are outside that you cannot apply, but in the ranking and the multiple lenses that we do with the analysis, we will be putting a priority on organizations based in the county. We are incentivizing collaboration or systems approach, which is something that ECCF is deeply committed to, not only in our own work around economic opportunity, the creative economy, but also in our experiences with the Columbia gas crisis. And now during COVID, we've seen the impact that can happen based on cross collaboration. Okay, you can advance. So for funding, a total of $10 million will be distributed over 5 years. It's $2 million per year will be distributed. Each applicant is eligible to apply for between $25,000 and $200,000 per year. The grants are designed to be one-time, one-year grants to be used within 12 months. So one question that I got on the last call is, can we apply for a multi-year program or an ongoing initiative? Yes, the answer is yes. However, if you were granted, those resources must be used within 12 months. As I mentioned, we're incentivizing cross-organization or cross-sector collaboration. Your organization can apply each year, but only one application per year. So we've had a couple of instances where an organization wants to be part of multiple collaborations or apply as part of a collaboration and then as just themselves as a single entity. We would prefer one application per organization, whether you're part of a collaboration or as a single organization each year. Okay. And so if you have any additional questions beyond this info session, please just feel free to reach out. The best way to reach me is by email, and we can set up a call. I have included my cell phone here, but I do have a preference to set up the call in advance. If you want to have a conversation, if there's something that this info session has not answered, please feel free to reach out. I'm very accessible. I do just request that the call, the time, the request for the meeting is not, the day before the application, both so that you have the time to apply, but so that I can have some time to respond to you. And I see that there's actually an error on my cell phone number here. So it's actually 617-308-2722. So we'll make sure that we correct that before we publish it. So I'm going to go ahead and pause, and I'm going to take a look at the chat function here. I don't see any other questions in the chat function. Can I answer any questions?
Hi, Carol. I'm Clara Ruby, chiming in as the grants manager for Raising a Reader Massachusetts. Oh no, it says my internet connection's unstable. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. So 2 questions. First of all, we're headquartered we're headquartered in Boston, but we do have operations in Lowell and an office in, Lawrence. And we have an office in Lawrence within the local public library. If we're only working in one of the 3 communities and we're headquartered outside, are we still eligible to apply?
Yes.
And quick follow-up to that, is it mandatory to apply in collaboration with other organizations if we're headquartered outside? I mean, we are not a standalone agency and we only work in partnership with other organizations to share our program. So inherently, we do have a lot of collaboration going on in the area, but just wanted to check if we needed to include one of those other organizations in our application.
No,
Awesome.
no, I
Thank you
mean,
so much.
if it's inherent to your programming, certainly you'll want to discuss it. But if you are
Right.
outside of the county and can demonstrate the work in one of those three or all three of the communities, you can certainly apply. We just wanted organizations to know that we will be prioritizing organizations based in Essex County.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the clarification.
Other questions?
Something did come up in the chat. Is the hope that the grants will be distributed across all criteria areas evenly?
That's certainly the hope, but because of the nature of this, we don't know how many proposals will be received. And frankly, because there's 5 categories, each with multiple subcategories, it would be very hard to do, an equal numeric distribution. But so what happens with all of our grant cycles is we start with a rubric and an analysis. It's a way to score proposals that are based on, a numeric ranking based on the guidelines. And there's really nothing super fancy about this. It's just whatever you see as the guidelines, we rank based on whether you have met those criteria. So that's what happens first. And then we go through a process of ranking those scores based on the reviewers. We go through and then we do an analysis when, as I said, we have multiple lenses that we're looking through. So for an example, in the recent COVID funds, I was constantly looking at a diversification of geography. I was looking at racial equity and an equity lens around the leadership of the organization. We go through multiple lenses. And so similar to that, the goal would be go through the ranking, talk about each of the proposals and the merits inherent on their own. And then we would go through a distribution and a multiple lens approach. What's the distribution to Andover? What's the distribution to North Andover? What's the distribution to Lawrence? It's not a perfect science because you may get, 20 applications from Andover and you may get 2 from Lawrence. So you can't really say in advance that you would have equal distribution, but our goal, we're constantly looking at population levels, impact, and those multiple lenses that I talked about. It sounds like, I had another question here. It sounds like this grant has nothing to do with the digital divide. Is that true? Digital divide is certainly something that we're looking at across all of our work. And so I wouldn't say it has nothing to do with it. It's certainly a lens I'm kind of constantly aware of, but it's not something that was outlined in advance in the guidelines. I think it would be very hard to, frankly, do any programming without addressing digital divide at this point in history. You're on mute. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Carol. Julia from Bread and Roses. We, by definition, collaborate with at least 40 community agencies through our food outreach, delivering food and other essential items to local agencies and churches. Would that be considered an official enough collaboration to warrant criteria around collaboration, or is it more in the stricter sense of 2 partner organizations that are coming together to apply together for this opportunity, specifically in this collaboration?
It's a good question. I would, so in the application, I would, indicate it's a collaboration, even though it's inherent to your work. I think that, I think it's a distinction you might want to outline in the narrative so that the reviewers understand that it's inherent to that, to the work. It's kind of just slicing it different ways, but I would just make sure that you outline that in the narrative so that the reviewers are sure to understand that. I understand that, and part of my role is making sure I'm a translator for the reviewers. But as I had mentioned before, the reviewers are all community-based folks, other than the folks that are from NiSource who are relatively new. But NiSource has made it very clear that they want to empower the voice of the community members in this process more so than their own. They're really more so listeners, listening in the process, the NiSource and EverSource folks.
Okay, thanks, Carol.
Question.
Yeah, hi Barry.
Hi, Carol. Thank you for doing this. So we were going to be applying for our STEM programming, which you are familiar with. And, typically in a typical year, we have a pretty clear sense of what the year is going to look like and the goals we want to hit programmatically, the number of kids we expect to serve, et cetera. The timing of this grant will sort of push it over 2 fiscal years if we were lucky enough to receive it. The challenge is that hey guys, could you keep your voices down? Sorry.
Exactly the same thing.
Right. Yeah. Unlike you, I didn't have the talk at first. I forgot to do that. The challenge is that, at least for the first, let's say, half of the grant period, things are going to look very different, potentially. We're doing a lot to sort of bring YDO to kids instead of having them come to us. And we're working on a hybrid curriculum if and when the time comes that we can start to do that safely in lockstep with the schools. But is there going to be, you think, an understanding amongst the reviewers that where we would normally be very concrete about how many kids we're going to serve, how much we intend to grow the program, the kind of metrics we expect to meet, that we might have to be somewhat vague, at least initially, or sort of break our expectations into 2 chunks, current and return to normal? So there might not be an answer to that, but I just sort of wanted to get a sense of if it makes sense.
No, I think it's a great question. And I think to your point, I think in the narrative, here's what we've done to date. Here's our, commitment and demonstration, or this is the illustration of what we've been able to do. We are anticipating X, Y, Z. But I think that there is a deep understanding about, frankly, that the ground is moving below us. And, there's a ton of uncertainty over the course of the winter. You're writing it now, but it would be implemented later. So it can't hurt to spell that out, to reiterate it, but there is a deep awareness of the ground, frankly, shifting below us. And so to the best of your ability, what would your goals be? What would be the anticipated way that you would move the program to make those adaptations would be appreciated to outline.
Me again? Would you mind going into a little bit more detail of, for this opportunity, what is meant specifically by a systems approach? I understand generally, but is there a more specific criteria that we should keep in mind for that?
Yeah, I think it's a range from ECCF's perspective. Again, this is a field of interest fund funded by NiSource, so we are a voice at the table. This is not an ECCF discretionary fund, but I'll kind of give 2 perspectives. Systems approach from ECCF's perspective is when you start with data, you bring together municipal, corporate, and nonprofit and philanthropic entities to move an indicator at a population level scale. And then below that, there's, a set criteria to adhere to. You have one point person or one backbone, if you will. You have an agreed upon set of metrics, you have an agreed upon communication plan, and then you're kind of constantly moving toward that population level scale change. That's our definition. For the last numerous COVID cycles, and then this, it's a little bit more flexible. And so it is, you know, working with obviously 2 or more other entities. That could be nonprofits or municipalities or the corporate sector in a combination to move a needle either programmatically or at the root cause on some sort of number. So it's much more flexible applied to this fund. We just saw that in the wake of the Columbia gas crisis, so much more was achieved when we partnered. The nonprofits partnered with the municipalities and the corporate sector to kind of move toward recovery. And so we would just like to encourage people to think of how they could move their work collectively forward by partnership. It's much more general for this, but you know, I'm always curious when I meet an agency who has never worked cross partnership in a community, particularly in a community like Greater Lawrence. I think it's such a natural way to operate. I'm not saying it's the only way, and we certainly will fund lots of programs that are just individual organizations. It'll probably be lower on the end of collaborative funding, but it's something that we're constantly thinking about because we've seen in real time that the impact tends to be greater.
Great, thanks.
Okay. You're a quiet group. Other questions? No? Well, as I said, I'll put why don't I quickly put my email and actually we can, yeah, let me put it in the chat box. My email, you can email me with questions. You can leave a voicemail on my landline. My messages tend to get backed up in there. I do check them every day. But you can also text me on my cell phone, and if we have a call, it is likely my cell phone that you would hear from. Okay. And we'll share the recording, we'll share the deck, we'll make that correction to the deck. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Just keep in mind, we have the holiday coming up, and I do need just a little bit of runway if you're gonna request a meeting. All right.